And after hearing Norman speak about his political position, I I I I was right in what I thought. And what I thought when I watched All in the Family was that this was the beginning of the dissolution of the patriarchal system.
Hey, Damon, since you brought
And
it
I
up.
say that with
Since you brought it up.
I could tell you things about people you named that the little Fruit Loops. They bend over billies. You cannot make it to the top in that industry without selling your soul.
What you just saw there was two clips taken from interviews of the actor Damon Wilson, who was the son in Sanford and Son, and due to the recent death of Norman Lear, they made a mistake and interviewed the wrong guy, or I should say the right guy, where, as you can see, he talked about Norman Lear and how his shows were the beginning of the taking down of the patriarchy, through the mainstream media, something that, decades into the patriarchy being completely removed, we're completely familiar with, with the emasculation of the male, etc., etc. But there was a beginning to all of this, and it took place through media. And Damon Wilson has been talking about Norman Lear's shows playing a great part in the beginning of the taking down of the patriarchy. And the interviewer was trying to interrupt him, but he made sure he got across his point. And then in the other interview, he talks about another familiar subject matter. The fact that you have to be a part of the bend over gang in order to be accepted, especially on the top level in Hollywood. I mean, we just saw a story where Neo a couple of months ago called out the whole push of sex changes with kids, and then months later he's in a cowgirl dress on The Masked Singer to basically put him back under correction. If you want to be a part of this and not completely be booted out, where you're going to have to make an action-based apology, which is cross-dress. Same thing with Mario Lopez, where he talked about, not being pro pushing that sort of agenda on children. He was talking about his young children, who I think was like 3 years old at the time. And then when the Saved by the Bell reboot took place, one of the main characters was a tranny. And again, it's just countless stories like that, things that Dave Chappelle has hinted towards. I mean, we're bearing witness to it with our own eyes, the one group that you're not allowed to talk about, even more so than like the Jewish folks, the LGBTQ, aka the alphabet sex cult. You can't speak out against that agenda because they use that flag as their American flag. And decades ago, people have talked about this. I mean, again, you had the John Waynes of the world who talked about the agenda push, in the 1970s, and even earlier before that. I always highlight Booker T. Washington talking about race hustlers in his debate with W.E.B. Du Bois. And again, this shows you this agenda push, this culture war. It's been happening long before 2016 and even before Trump's father was born, let alone happening before Trump. And again, you get many instances like this where you have, entertainers and various others calling the crap out. And specifically when it comes to entertainers, I mean, again, they've been calling it out for decades, but a lot of times people would just dismiss them, especially if they weren't hugely successful, and they just dismiss them by calling them bitter. Oh, they're just bitter because they didn't have, as a successful career as others. But with the Will Smith stories, I mean, hell, that whole entanglement series with Jada Pinkett and Will Smith, I mean, people are seeing more and more, and outside of Will Smith, there's many other people where, there's something to this whole, you have to bend over, you have to play alphabet games in order to be truly accepted within their Hollywood cult. Because again, out of all of the agendas, that's the top agenda that they want to push, the LGBTQ alphabet sex cult nonsense. Because unlike the other agendas, that one completely unearths and does a 180-degree about face on anything that's been established as far as tradition and normality. Because it's an agenda that pushes to accept fake alternate reality as present and real reality. With the whole multiple gender pronouns, the medical mutilation of children. So again, that's why they want to know you're down with the bend over game if they're going to allow you into Hollywood. I mean, again, you hear the story about Richard Pryor getting, his cheeks clapped by Marlon Brando that Quincy Jones let out. So many stories, and even from child actors or actresses. So people, I believe, are now less inclined to try to dismiss this. Now, of course, you had people in the comment section saying, oh, he's just bitter, blah, blah, blah. But it's because, they don't want to believe the worst about their idol guys. And quite frankly, they're down with the agenda themselves. People outside of Hollywood. And he also talked about how, Norman Lear stole several show ideas. Now, when he was talking about that, you had the pro-blackity blacks. Of course, they were co-signing that one because, that's what they believe about everything. But in this instance, in this case, I believe because one of the shows that he highlighted that Norman Lear, pretty much took credit for and stole was Good Times. And how it was based on another guy who had Evans as a last name. But again, I've seen this guy speak before in an interview. I saw him on a Fox News morning show years ago. And again, this is a guy who voluntarily decided to, be a preacher in the early 80s where he could have still got work for himself. Kind of like what the chick who plays Kirk Cameron, sort of like what Kirk Cameron did. He voluntarily left Hollywood to, live a life as a Christian man. And this guy's been doing it as a preacher since the early 80s. And I mean, this dude, I highly recommend checking out his recent interviews. Damon Wilson, star of Sanford and Son, who he played the son in Sanford and Son. I highly encourage you to listen to his recent interviews. But again, we have another person calling out the Bend Over Gang, the Bend Over Party, and how you have to be down with the alphabet sex cult in order to be fully welcomed into Hollywood, let alone have a shot in hell to be at the top of Hollywood, which again shows you that it really never has been about talent. And again, the reason why the agenda was probably better hidden before because you actually did get talent out of it. But now the talent decreasing, it's more obvious to those who would rather ignore it than really address the issue with this agenda being pushed through the mainstream media, which again, they've been doing, but the less talent makes it more obvious, to even the biggest deniers or people who want to be willfully ignorant about the situation. But yeah, the interviewer, when he was talking about Norman Lear, was really trying to interrupt him. But he made it a point to highlight how, that's where the attack on the patriarchy through, primetime television, a lot of the trees that we see today, well, the seeds of those attacks took place with those Norman Lear shows. And you can see it in those shows. Even though they're still funny and the humor still holds up, you can still see that attack against men, against the patriarchy through those shows. And salute to this man for being straightforward and calling it out. And the reason why he's able to call it out is because he's not dependent on and doesn't care to be attached to Hollywood and all of the glowing praises, and not because it's not just the richest people who have the money. The reason why they still go along with it because they want to still be attached to the glowing praises and being invited to the glamorous events around the world. But anyway, salute to this guy for being a